So as we continue this story on behavioral evolution, we also have to consider the fact that language evolved, and we communicate a lot now, maybe too much, because social media obviously has made us be constantly in touch with many people, maybe not necessarily with the person sitting across, because each person is on WhatsApp or Facebook or something. Nonetheless, how the language evolved itself is not very easily understood. There have been even theories that birds made sounds before us, and we listened to the birds and tried to do it, and that the bone structure, brain structure, Adam's apple and so on changed along the way to allow us to make more sounds. And whether this happened at the same time across the world or it was regional, for example, now Chinese language has many more tones and sounds than Western languages, and it's hard to learn that language if you're already grown up, because many of those things have to be learned very early on in life and so on and so forth. So we can revisit the Neanderthals in this sense a little bit. As we said, Neanderthals have interbred with humans, and everybody carries some a fraction of Neanderthal genes, more in Asia, Australia maybe than or Europe than elsewhere, and so on and so forth. And there is this article from The Conversation which argues that Sapiens battled Neanderthals for supremacy for over 100,000 years. So here are the angles of failed offensive by archaic Homo sapiens in these. So this is the demarcation. Here are a couple of failed attempts, and then Homo sapien offensives that presumably succeeded. And you can see that starting here, before 160,000 years, modern sapiens were expanding into various parts of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, from eastern Africa into southern and western parts, and of course northward. And we will see again in more details that along these timelines there was evolution of the Ice Age. So we were in an interglacial here, I think, and the new Ice Age would have started by 125,000 years ago. And whether climate is a driver for these, as we said already, remains debatable. And you can see the migrations or diaspora out of Africa here, with conflicts against Neanderthals occurring along the way. 25,000 years ago, 90. So you can see progressively more recent attacks. 38,000 here. The 200,000 years ago, maybe there was an attempt that is considered failed for whatever evidence is used for that. More recently, 36,000 years ago, all the way here into Western Europe, and of course also going all the way into Siberia, Asia, those parts here. 45,000 years ago. So by then you had huge icebergs here. 24,000 years ago here. So Denisovan lands. So these were all the Neanderthal territories. These were the archaic Sapien and modern Sapien territories. Denisovans found in the Denisova Russian cave, Siberian cave. Goes back more than 80,000 years ago here, more than 70,000 years ago, and so on. So did Neanderthals battle with the Homo sapiens and lost and went extinct, or did they just breed and merge their genetic footprint with modern humans? So let's leave it there and see why civilization, as we call it now, agricultural and then industrial lifestyles emerged. It's not so obvious why we transitioned from hunter-gatherers to agriculturalists, because hunting and gathering had many more advantages over farming as a lifestyle. Farmers even now live in a constant, uncertain, risky livelihood option. This is why more and more humans leave farming as a livelihood and rather go and drive a taxi, for example, in countries like India. So farming as a livelihood continues to lose people. Of course, there is more efficient, sustainable yield growth with fertilizers and so on as well. Nonetheless, how the extinction of Ice Age mammals may have forced us to invent civilization. So is it possible that climate and our own hunting drove the big game, like the woolly mammoth, which was around even as recently as 5,000 or 4,500 years ago? Did it force us to invent civilization and try to domesticate wild grasses like wheat and rice and corn and so on? And agriculture evolved in the Levant basin and then independently maybe in Asia and then spread elsewhere. So those questions remain as well. And coming back to the behavioral advances, obviously changing from hunting and gathering to agriculturalists and pastoralists would have changed behavior. Whether that translated to anatomical changes, brain changes, and then feedback to behavioral changes and so on, obviously are deeper questions. And let's see, the arguments by Axel Timmerman, again, this is a recent paper that came out this year in 2022, are that the speciation and diaspora have been related to climate through what they call as habitat suitability index, which uses multiple environmental factors and other factors, maybe like crop suitability and so on, to derive these kind of maps looking at Homo heidelbergensis sites from where we all came. So if you go back to 850,000 to 600,000 years ago, Eurasia and Africa already having habitat suitability in this range, being very favorable here, somewhat favorable here, but less favorable. Nonetheless, let's say Ice Age resource limitation, conflicts or whatever, just simple exploration led to colonizing different parts. So Denisovans evolved around here. So that speciation is again related to, or their disappearance could be related to lack of habitat suitability. And here you have Neanderthalensis, which started with low habitat suitability and then combined with other issues. So you can see here Heidelbergensis speciation leading to Homo sapiens 300 to 200,000 kilo years. We are still here. They have gone extinct. They have all gone extinct here. We stand alone. So the key question is whether climate drivers are really critical. So habitat suitability here over time, and these are different places. So this is the northern branch and the southern branch. So that question may not completely be answered ever, because anthropologists would say that climate is not a single driver ever for these kind of speciations or cultural changes, behavioral changes, that multiple knocks are required, because with the first knock and second knock, humans would have started to innovate, whether it is to save water, to hunt better, to invent new tools, new technologies and so on. Only when persistent negative perturbations happened, they moved or they went extinct. And more recent such extinctions also are possible with Mayans and Incans and Mohenjo-daro, Harappa and Babylonians, Mesopotamians and so on and so forth. So climate may not be the ultimate or may not be the proximal cause, but it may be the ultimate cause in terms of eventually how it drives migration or extinction. So language evolved along the way. There are many interesting ideas on how that would have happened. Rob Dunbar from Stanford argues in a book that gossip it played a key role, even though people obviously disagree with it. Here, his abstract conversation is a uniquely human phenomenon. Analysis of freely forming conversations indicate that approximately 2/3 of the conversation time is devoted to social topics, most of which can be given the generic label gossip. This article first explores the origins of gossip as a mechanism for bonding social groups. So if you want to find common connections, you start by talking about politics, cultures, or people you know in common as a gossip. Tracing these origins back to social grooming among primates. So primates bond with each other and build teams and social groups by grooming, picking off lice and removing insects and so on and so forth. It then asks why social gossip in this sense should form so important a component of human interaction, and presents evidence to suggest that aside from servicing social networks, a key function may be related to explicitly controlling free riders. So when you have a team that works together to feed each other, protect each other, there is somebody who is not contributing, who is called a free rider, like somebody who's using social benefits but not paying tax, for example, or somebody who is riding a bus without buying a ticket, and there are many things. Finally, the author reviews briefly the role of social cognition in facilitating conversations of this kind. So in general, language is considered a very special for humans because we not only describe things that we saw elsewhere that exist, but we can also write fiction, science fiction, describe things that don't exist. The example used in some book is that we can talk about a fruit that looks like a grapefruit but smells like a mango and tastes like an avocado, and so we can use our knowledge, memory, visual cues, audio cues, olfactory cues to describe things that are imaginary. So does this also allow us to create imaginary gossip? Obviously, gossip is a big thing now, and we get into what is called confirmation bias. Somebody can start a fake rumor, fake news, and when you go on Facebook or Google or wherever, it begins to track your data and begins to feed you the things that you look for. So soon you have a filtered feed where you get fed what you like to see, what you like to look for. So this becomes a confirmation bias, so that your exploration into things that are not in your bailiwick begin to be less, so you begin to build an idea of a complete universe that is consistent with your pre-existing views, for example. So gossip can also become part of the confirmation bias, where you seek people who tell you what you want to hear about something, about a religion, about a group, about a race, about a language, and so on and so forth, about a god, whatever. Okay, so obviously language is very critical, and it can have a negative impact as well, but the question is whether that is part of the behavioral evolution, genetic evolution, anatomical brain evolution, and whether that feeds back to the brain, and whether then things get transmitted genetically, and so on. Why some people are very good at learning languages and some people are not, and so on and so forth. Okay, so again, a narrative that is very interesting, and I am obviously enjoying talking about these things, but you should explore lots of references to fill in the gaps in my very brief and abstract narrative. Okay.